All right. I'm just going to keep on going right away. Everyone okay with that? Good. So today I'm here to talk about automating security using PowerShell. My name is Jaap. I'm a little bit short on time today with everything I want to show, so tumbleweed. I'll explain who I am later. And otherwise check out my Twitter or my blog. So the agenda of today. There will be a lot of PowerShell. PowerShell is my hammer. I love using PowerShell because it's what I know. So this presentation will feature a lot of PowerShell. Just to get an idea, how many people actually use PowerShell, so I know what a level is here. All right, well, I'd say about 50% in an optimistic sense. Okay, at first I'll be talking about PowerShell, how it's being used both offensively and defensively. Then I'll show a demo using Mimikatz and how we can see what is being executed. Then I'll move on to a bit about offensive and defensive PowerShell. I'll do a demo to show how to work with obfuscated code. And at the end, hopefully I'll have some time for Q&A. And after every demo, I'll just check if anyone has any questions. If there's any questions, I'll do a quick 1-2 questions and move on with the presentation. Good. So PowerShell has been around for quite some time. It's obviously a Microsoft product. We've reached version 5 with the release of Windows 10 and Server 2016. And with version 5, we got a lot of cool benefits from a security point of view. They really double down on what will be logged when it's executed. So in previous versions of PowerShell, what you could set up transcription using PowerShell profiles and stuff like that. But it was very easy to get around that. There have been some projects on GitHub called NPS, not PowerShell, which was just a simple C# program that loaded the PowerShell engine, and then you could execute PowerShell code with no more logging. So starting from version 5, it's no longer, well, it's still possible to do it, but if you have logging configured, which I'll show is very easy to do, you'll be able to see what is going on your system. Am I doing this? Okay, can you guys hear?
Test.
Perfect, thanks. Okay, let's see, where did I leave off? Logging, yeah, I love logging. In the demo I will be showing, I recorded a video. I'll use Mimikatz. Who here is familiar with Mimikatz? I think pretty much every security conference someone will demo something with Mimikatz, so I'll be the one this time. So Mimikatz and PowerShell logging. I'll first explain what kind of system I have. I have Server 2008 R2. It's an old operating system. I deliberately chose 2008 to show the benefit of actually installing PowerShell 5 on top of it. Actually, it's running PowerShell 5.1, but it's not a huge difference. One thing to consider if you have Windows systems is that PowerShell will not automatically be patched by Windows Update. So if you want to have a new version of PowerShell, you'll actually actively have to have some kind of strategy to deploy it in your environment. All right, let's see if it actually autoplays. There we go. So first things first, I'm going to enable logging. I said it was really easy. It's basically 2 registry keys. The top one is script block invocation logging. That means that's the most verbose way of logging, so enable that. And script block logging. Script block logging will enable logging in the Windows event log, in the PowerShell operational log. So this is set up. I'll be working with a PowerSploit module. This is a PowerShell module that uses a lot of Metasploit functionality. I'll import it. There's a lot of commands available here. Sorry for the static. Hi. Okay. All right, so oh, okay. So Mimikatz, I'm showing some examples here of how you can use it. It's very simple, invoke -Mimikatz, and then you can execute it. So let's see when I'm actually going to type it. Should be coming soon. There we go. Invoke Mimikatz. And this will just be executing Mimikatz and dumping my credentials. Because it's a little bit hard to read and we're working with plain text, let's see. The operational log, I didn't do any different configuration. It's set to 15 megabytes, size of 15 megabytes, and it automatically rolls over. So if you have a lot of events, it will just do circular logging. All right, here I'm showing Mimikatz, so you can see my username and password. It's a little bit small. It says administrator and besides Amsterdam. So it's very good. It has numbers and capital letters. So what else do we need? Yeah. So what we can see here, the oldest record number is number 7000. So we can see that it has already rolled over. To show what will happen if I execute Mimikatz 5 times in a row, we will see that a lot of events will be generated in the event log. So this will run. It actually takes longer to run, but I hopefully cut it short. It will run 5 times, and every time a script block is running, it will log it in the event log. And every time it does that, we can see here, it ran 5 times, and it's now up to 340,000 events that have been lost since because of circular logging. So the fact that we enable the most verbose logging also means that every time one command is being executed, we get about 10 megabytes of logging. So it's a lot of logging. So we should probably turn that off, which is what I'm doing here. So I set the invocation script block logging to 0. So we have a little bit less verbose logging, but we'll actually be able to get the information we want, because right now, before we weren't able to see what had been executed. So I clear the event log so we can start from scratch. And because I reconfigure the logging, I open a new PowerShell, because otherwise it uses the old settings. It only checks it when the session loads. So I execute Mimikatz again. I get the passwords just like the same way. I'll check the event log, and I can see one of the first events in there was invoke Mimikatz. So we can use this to take a look what kind of commands are being executed on your system, and based on that, we can tie actions to that. So, any questions about what I've shown here? I know the font is really small. I didn't know how big the screen would be here. So what I've done, I set up PowerShell logging. I use Mimikatz to dump the credentials. I then reconfigure the logging because I was generating too many events, and I don't want to buy a new SAN just to be able to store my PowerShell logging. I followed what was happening in the event log, and because of that I could see that invoke Mimikatz had run on my system. Yes?
Yeah, so could you, for example, see in the logging, could you configure the logging in such a way that you log, for example, request to LSS process with Mimikatz underlying to it? Or is it currently only like the commands that are executed?
So the question was, let me rephrase it. The question was, can we also see what kind of commands have been executed to LSAS, and can we go into that level of detail? It depends. If it's being executed by the PowerShell engine, you would be able to see it in the logging. If it's outside of PowerShell, then it's no longer in the logging. If LSS is in here, I didn't dig through all the events, so I'm actually not sure in what sense we can see what has been executed there. Does that answer your question? All right. So, offensive PowerShell. Because of this logging, a trend I've been seeing more is that people in the past 2 or 3 years, PowerShell has really been picking up. There've been a lot of pen testing frameworks, malware showing up that at least one of the components of PowerShell is using PowerShell. If not everything, at least something is PowerShell. Is that because of the logging, it also becomes easier to see what's happening in the environment. And I've heard situations at companies where they had blue and red team competitions, where the blue team is trying to figure out what the red team is doing. And there's been some big successes for blue teams because of the PowerShell logging, because they could just follow step by step how they were going to an environment. Unfortunately, in the real world, even if PowerShell logging is available, I personally haven't seen a lot of Server 2008 where anyone actually went to the trouble of installing PowerShell 5. So in the real world, it's still a pretty good tool for an attacker. It's easy to use. I mean, even I can use it, so that has to say something. And because it's available on so many platforms, and it is also available on Linux and Mac, but yeah, it's the same thing as Server 2008. No one installs it there, so it is a very easy target. It's a lot more versatile than using WScript or CScript to get your code executed. And as has been shown today, it's very easy to just download arbitrary code from the internet and just directly execute it. Because logging gives us the information, in the previous example I just showed that I typed invoke mimikatz, and okay, if you do that, we can just make a simple regular expression if mimikatz is being executed and another bunch of malicious commands. Trigger a monitoring alert or do something with the system. But then there's also the side of obfuscation, because if there's good logging, then obfuscation becomes a good tool to hide what you're doing. And to show what we can do against that, I borrowed some scripts from Lee Holmes. I'm not sure if anyone saw his talk on Black Hat. He used mathematics to determine how different a script is from known code. So if you take a script repository and you analyze how the different characters that are used in the script are distributed, then you can calculate how different a piece of code is from that. And based on that, you could establish, okay, this is either malicious or someone doesn't know how to code. And then we've arrived at the next demo. So obfuscation and how we can detect this. So here we go. So the first thing I do, I have 2 folders. I have one folder that's a random repository with about 300 scripts in there. And I have another folder with a couple of standard scripts, and I put the invoke mimikatz script in there as well. So the first thing I'll do is I'll count the characters that are in the script. So I put it in a variable, global characters, and I just load up my entire repository. So let's take a look what the top 10 characters are. And we see it's just, well, it's a little bit off the side, but it's just the normal letters. So E, T, R, all the letters. If you play Scrabble, you won't get any points for it. So here's a bit more code. What we're doing here, we're going to use the vector similarity, and we're going to take a look at how a script rates against the entire repository. How different is that code? And based on that, we can establish, okay, is this going to be malicious, or is this going to be just regular code like we would expect? So we're going to throw this into a PowerShell object, and we're going to run this against the repository with 6 normal scripts, and 1 is invoke Mimikatz. And we'll take a look what the results are. If I'm going to press on enter. There we go. And what we would expect to see is that the normal scripts, they're going to get a good score, close to 100% similar to the repository. Of course, never 100%. And scripts that are out of bounds, are using obfuscation, are using silly ways to try to avoid detection, are going to show up like invoke Mimikatz over here. It has a score of 57% similar. So it's actually quite different. And in part, this is because it's using a lot of C# code. Other part is that it uses a lot of base 64 in there as well. And that is not something you would use in regular code unless you have a very good reason. All right. So the next thing I'll do, if the video continues, there we go. The next thing I'll do is, this is one of my uses for using obfuscation in a useful way. What I like to do is, sometimes I like to compress my scripts if I'm in environments where it's necessary to have the code be as small as possible. So I've made a compressed base 64 of an existing script. So it's just a whole bunch of garbage. And I'm going to compare how that, what kind of score this would get. So we can see, even though I didn't do anything special, just make it base 64, we can already see that its rating has dropped to 72%. To give you an indication, anything under 85% is suspicious. Anything under 80 is definitely something you want to look at. So here I'm showing that it's just a regular script, just to delete some old files, nothing special. In ISE, ISE is one of the script editors for PowerShell. There's a module called ISE Steroids, and you can convert a script into obfuscated code. And then you get something like this. I wouldn't know what this is doing anymore. I mean, ls, what the hell is that? So I've written this to disk as well, and I'm once again going to take a look what this is, what kind of score this is going to get. And you can see by using this obfuscation, it already drops to 64%, while the regular script would be about 90, 97, 90, 98%. There we go. So what I've shown here, I used a script that's available in the PowerShell gallery to determine the character frequency. So when we're looking at the character frequency, we exclude stuff like white space and line endings. Then I used the vector frequency to take a look at how the character frequency relates to my entire repository. Then I encoded existing scripts, and I looked at the different methods of obfuscation. So in one, I used compression and base 64. In the second example, I used a built-in method in ISE Steroids to obfuscate scripts. Something else you can do in PowerSploit is PowerSploit or Empire? Which one was it? Empire. In Empire, another PowerShell module, there's also a function called invoke obfuscation, and you can obfuscate your scripts in a lot of other different ways than I've just shown here. This just to give you an indication of how you can see if something is suspicious code without even knowing what is being executed. So, any questions about this demo? Okay. So then, defensive PowerShell. How can we use PowerShell defensively? Well, one of the recent examples of when I was put in the position of having to use PowerShell defensively was with WannaCry. Everyone is familiar with WannaCry and what happened there? Good. It was not good. You would think that SMB1 would not be enabled everywhere, but we had some clients that were very unhappy when this all happened. But this was one of the cases where detection was not really that important because we knew what was going on those systems. But what we used PowerShell for, we used it as an impromptu configuration tool to make sure that everything either got SMB1 disabled or got patched to a correct level. So we used a number of scripts there that we combined to figure out which systems are vulnerable, which systems are patched, and based on that, based on the data we gathered, we continued on using custom scripts to deploy the patches and to make sure that the systems were configured correctly and could no longer be targeted by WannaCry. So that is how we used it defensively. I've reached the end of this. Do you have any questions in regards to what I've discussed?
Any questions? Thanks.
This is your first question today, right?
Yeah, I know, right? So, you've shown us a lot of things what PowerShell can do. Maybe on a bit more of a personal note, how did you get into PowerShell and why do you prefer it so much? Why is this your hammer, so to speak?
I was put on a project where we had to migrate some stuff off a server, and there was no way to get it off because it was a proprietary semantic product, and we didn't have vendor support anymore, and we needed to get stuff off there. And they just said, you guys have 2 months, you can figure out a strategy how to do it. We don't care if you just have to double click every file individually, or you're going to do something in an automated way. So we used a combination of VB script, it was a few years ago, VB script and PowerShell to get that migration done. And what it ended up being was a pretty easy job, because after we prepared the scripts, it took us about 3-4 months. We spent the year afterwards performing all the migrations in a fully automated way, and all we were doing was let's just say I was drinking coffee while the migrations were taking place. So that was my first time I really saw the benefit of automation, and that I actually put it into practice. The reason it was PowerShell, it was new at the time, and it was on the Windows platform, so PowerShell was the logical choice.
Cool, thanks.
So I know you played with the new logging stuff in PowerShell v5, and what logging level did you get? Well, I know that the obfuscation does get deobfuscated when the actual PowerShell command runs.
That's correct.
So, in your experience, what's the best logging level to continue to capture that without losing out information?
My strategy for systems where it's actually critical enough to have this kind of logging enabled is to enable event forwarding. Forward your events to a different server, just at the highest logging level, the first one I configured with invocation logging, and then figure out on that server which events can be discarded and which ones you actually want. So I would enable, for critical systems, the highest level of logging.
Thank you. I have kind of a follow-up or a comment on that, and that is if you're in a situation where invocation logging is too much information, or where you're repeating a lot of information because you have a bunch of script logs executing one over the other, you could complement the strategy of using script log logging without invocation logging with something like sysmon, for example, that will also give you at least a snapshot of changes to the environment, which is what invocation logging is trying to achieve. So that's kind of an alternative.
Yeah, and Procmon is also quite nice for very short-term logging to see what's going on. So yeah, definitely. So I would be very happy if someone, even if you don't have a question, raise your hand on the right side afterwards.
This is more of a comment / follow-on to both those comments, but we use both sysmon and PowerShell logging. But the cool thing about the event forwarding is there's some specific XML that you can use to tune event forwarding on the server. So say you have administrators using a lot of the same scripts all the time throughout the day, you can take those, tune them out, and then still have logging turned on at a higher level, so you're not getting a lot of logs sent to your event server. And we also use sysmon to answer your question with process access turned on to see what's being injected into LSASS.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Jaap.
Thank you.